My uncle stood up at the Thanksgiving table, looked me dead in the eyes in front of 31 people, and said the words he'd been holding back for years. You were charity. Always were. Ask your mother what that means. My Aunt Carol dropped her serving spoon into the green bean casserole. It didn't shatter anything. It just made a small, soft thud. But that sound carried the weight of every unfinished sentence I'd heard my whole life, because it told me she already knew what was coming. 23 years. I had spent 23 years at that table, helping cook, helping clean, showing up early, staying late, loving people who measured love like it was something that could run out. But here's what nobody at that table expected. My grandmother Bet, 79 years old, barely 5 feet 2, she hadn't spoken more than 10 words all evening. She'd been sitting at the far end of the table, her old quilted handbag in her lap, watching. She stood up slowly. She reached into that bag, the one she'd carried since 2003. Green canvas with a broken zipper she'd repaired twice with safety pins. And she pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored. Old. The kind of paper that goes soft at the folds when it's been opened and refolded too many times. She held it up and said 8 words in a voice that didn't shake once. Harold left this for exactly this kind of night. What was in that envelope rearranged every relationship in that room. Before I tell you what happened, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story actually speaks to you. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I genuinely love knowing where people are listening from. My name is Kara. I'm 34 years old, and this is what happened the November my family finally ran out of places to hide. Let me take you back to the weeks before Thanksgiving, because what happened at that table didn't start there. It started long before anyone carved a turkey or passed the rolls. I grew up in Millhaven, Ohio. Population just under 9,000. One main street, one grocery store, a diner called Patsy's that's been serving the same chicken and waffles since 1984, and the kind of familiarity that can feel like a warm blanket or a tight grip depending on the day. I'm a paramedic, have been for 8 years. I work 48-hour rotations out of Station 4 on the east side of town. The hours are brutal. The work is the kind that sits in your chest at 2 in the morning when the rest of the world is asleep. You see things on that job that don't leave you. You just learn to carry them. My daughter Rosie is 7. She has her father's eyes, my stubborn chin, and a laugh that sounds like someone shaking a jar of coins. It's the best sound I know. Her dad, Danny, moved to Seattle 3 years ago for work that he said was temporary and turned out to be permanent. He calls on birthdays. Sometimes. So, it's me and Rosie. We live in a 2-bedroom house on Clover Street, 11 minutes from the house where I grew up. The house where every holiday of my entire life was held, where every argument started and ended, where I learned both what love looks like and what it looks like when people use love as a leash. That house belongs to my grandmother, Bet. It's a white 2-story with green shutters and a big porch on the front and a yard that wraps around the back. Bet's late husband, Harold, my grandfather, built the back porch himself in 1978 with lumber he hauled in the bed of his pickup truck. He planted the oak tree in the corner. That tree is now 46 years old and taller than the house. Harold died 4 years ago. He was the kind of man who fixed things quietly and asked for nothing. He had big hands and a small voice, and he always smelled like wood shavings and coffee. I still miss him every single day. After Harold died, the house stayed Betty's. Nobody questioned that. What people did start to question, or at least start to circle, was what would happen to it eventually. That's where my Uncle Dale comes in. Dale is my mother's older brother. He's 57. He has the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no by the people who should have told him no. He ran a landscaping company for 15 years, sold it, made decent money, and has spent the years since then operating like a man whose opinion is the final word in every room. Dale lives in the bigger house on Pembroke Lane, 20 minutes away. His wife Tammy, 53, is the kind of woman who laughs loudest at Dale's jokes and goes quiet when anything serious is on the table. His son Ryan, 28, lives in Dale's spare bedroom and works maybe 25 hours a week at his dad's old business, which Dale still has partial interest in. Ryan has never paid rent anywhere in his life that I'm aware of. Then there's my mother, Patricia. She's 58. He retired from the post office, soft-spoken in ways that have always confused me. Because soft-spoken and honest are not the same thing, and I spent a long time believing they were. My grandmother had 2 children, Dale and Patricia, and for as long as I can remember, Dale ran the family the way people run small towns. Loud, confident, sure that his version of the story was the only version worth hearing. For most of my life, I accepted the low hum of being on the outside. I couldn't point to any single moment and say that's when they excluded me. It was more like 100 small things. The way Dale made toasts at holidays and my name was always the last one mentioned, if at all. The way Ryan got praised for showing up and I got silence for everything I carried. And the way my mother sometimes looked at me like she was sorry for something she hadn't told me yet. I cooked every Thanksgiving for 12 years. 12. I'm talking full spread. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes from scratch, gravy, stuffing, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, dinner rolls, cranberry sauce, and 2 pies. Apple and pumpkin. Every year at 7 in the morning, I was in Biddy's kitchen, sometimes with Rosie on my hip when she was small enough for that. Nobody assigned it to me. I just showed up because I loved my grandmother and because the work was something I could give when I didn't know what else to offer. Nobody ever said thank you. Not once in 12 years. That's not an exaggeration. Dale would walk in at noon carrying a case of beer and a bag of chips, and my grandmother would say, "Dale, you didn't have to." He'd wave his hand like it was nothing. Like walking through a door carrying a 12-pack was a contribution. I want to tell you about something that happened in October, 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, because it's where the real story starts. I was dropping Rosie off at Bet's on a Saturday afternoon. I worked an overnight shift, and Bet watched Rosie for me on those nights, the same way she'd watched me when I was little, and my mother worked evenings at the post office. Bet had a small bedroom off the kitchen she kept ready for Rosie. She'd painted it yellow, Rosie's favorite color, without telling me she was doing it. One morning, I came to pick Rosie up, and the room was yellow and Rosie was spinning in circles saying it looked like butter, and Bet was standing in the doorway watching her with a look on her face that I can only describe as completely full. That October Saturday, I came in the back door and heard Dale talking in the living room. He didn't know I was there. I stopped in the kitchen and listened. Not because I was snooping, because I heard my name. "Kara's been dropping that kid here long enough," he was saying. "Mama's not young. She doesn't need to be running a daycare every week." I stood very still. "And when the time comes," Dale continued, "Ryan should have the house. He's family. He's blood. Kara's not going to be the one who ends up with this property." I heard Bet say something I couldn't make out. Then Dale's voice again, lower but still clear. "I'm just saying, some things should stay where they belong." I walked back out the door, got in my car, sat for a while with my hands on the wheel. Kara's not family. Ryan is blood. Some things should stay where they belong. I had heard variations of that my whole life. I just hadn't heard it stated that plainly before. The next morning, my Aunt Linda, Harold's younger sister, 62, retired schoolteacher who lived alone in a small house near the library, called me. Linda was always careful with her words, the way people are careful with something fragile. "Kara," she said, "has Dale said anything to you lately about your grandmother's house?" "I overheard him talking about it yesterday." Silence on her end. "There's something going on," she said. "I can't say more right now. But at Thanksgiving, Sit near Bet. Don't sit at the far end. Linda, what's happening? Just trust me. Be near her. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time holding the phone. That night, I wrote it on a notepad and stuck it on the refrigerator. Sit near Bet. 2 weeks later, I was at the Millhaven Hardware on Main Street, picking up a replacement part for Rosie's bed frame that had cracked. As I was loading the part into my trunk, I saw Dale coming out of Hendricks and Cole, the law office on the corner of Main and 2nd. He was carrying a large envelope, the stiff kind, the kind that comes from a lawyer's office and means something official is happening. He didn't see me right away. I called out to him. Dale, hey, what were you doing at Hendricks and Cole? His face went flat. Not surprised. Flat. And the way a face goes when someone has prepared for a question and decided not to answer it. Family business, he said. He got in his truck and left. I stood there in the parking lot and turned that phrase over in my head. Family business. I was family. I was right there. And I had just been told, without a single word, that whatever was in that envelope had nothing to do with me. I drove home. Rosie was at a sleepover. I ate leftover soup at the kitchen table and sat with the quiet and tried to decide whether I was afraid or angry or both. Both. Definitely both. But there was something Dale didn't know. Something none of them knew. Harold had kept a secret too. Thanksgiving morning. I was up at 5:30. I'd worked a full overnight rotation the night before. 12 hours, 2 calls, one of them hard, in the kind that follows you home. I'd gotten maybe 3 hours of sleep in the chair by the window. My eyes felt like sandpaper. My back ached from the cot at the station, but the turkey wouldn't baste itself. So I got up. I drove to Betty's with Rosie still in her pajamas, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. She fell back asleep on the couch while I started the turkey. By 6:30, the oven was going. By 8, the stuffing was assembled. By 9, the mashed potatoes were peeled and waiting, the green beans were trimmed, the cranberry sauce was cooling, and the pie crusts were crimped and ready. Bet came into the kitchen at 8:30, moving slowly but steady, the way she always did in the mornings. She put a hand on my shoulder from behind without saying anything, just rested it there for a moment. And then she made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and watched me work. You know you don't have to do all this, she said. I've been doing this for 12 years, Grandma. I know you don't have to. You do it because you want to. She was quiet for a moment. There's a difference between people who show up because they want to, and people who show up because they want something, she said. You've always been the first kind. I didn't know what to say, so I just stirred the gravy. Patricia, my mother, arrived at 10. She set out the napkins and the good plates, which took about 20 minutes. Then she went to sit in the living room and turned on the Macy's parade. That was her contribution. Same as every year. Dale and Tammy arrived at noon. Dale was carrying a pie from the grocery store bakery. A bakery sticker still on the box. He set it on the counter like he'd spent all morning on it. Now we're talking, he said, looking at the spread of food I'd been preparing for 5 hours. He didn't say who made it. Ryan came in behind him carrying a 2-liter bottle of soda. He punched my shoulder lightly in that way that's supposed to be friendly and said, Kara, you went all out again, huh? Not a thank you. Just an observation. Tammy walked past me into the living room without making eye contact. Rosie woke up from the couch, wandered into the kitchen still half asleep, and climbed up on the step stool next to me. She was still holding the elephant. Mama, can I help with something? You can fold the napkins, I said. She was very serious about it. She folded each one in thirds, pressing the crease down with both small hands. Nicowin carried them to the dining room table one at a time. She was proud of every single one. I watched her and felt, in the middle of everything, a small, bright calm. By 4 o'clock, 31 people were at Bet's house. Extended family, neighbors, Harold's old friends, people from church. Bet kept a big Thanksgiving. She always had. She said Harold would haunt her if she let the table get small. The dining room had two tables pushed together, the big oak one and the folding one from the garage, covered with a tablecloth Bet had used since 1989, mismatched chairs pulled from all over the house, string lights in the window because Harold had put them up one year and Bet had never taken them down. Dale sat at the head of the table. I noticed that. Harold's chair. The chair nobody was supposed to sit in. Dale sat there like he'd been sitting there for years. Under his chair, I caught a glimpse of the corner of that stiff envelope from Hendricks and Cole. I noticed because I had just carried the turkey platter past him, and my eyes dropped without thinking. Bet sat at the other end of the table. Her quilted green handbag was on her lap, not under the chair, not on the floor behind her. In her lap, both hands resting on top of it. Aunt Linda sat to my right. She had quietly made sure that seat was saved for me. On my left, Rosie in her good dress, dark blue with small white flowers, her feet not quite touching the floor, swinging slowly under the chair. Harold's oldest friend, a man named Frank Bellamy, 74, sat midway down the table. He and Harold had worked together at the Millhaven plant for 30 years. Frank had given a reading at Harold's funeral. Bet had invited him personally, which I thought was just Bet being Bet. I didn't yet understand it was something more deliberate than that. Reverend Susan Hooper from First Methodist said grace. Everyone bowed their heads. I looked up once. Dale's eyes were open. He was looking down the table, not at anyone specific. He was looking at the room like a man doing a final check before an announcement. The food was passed. Plates were filled. The noise of 31 people eating and talking filled the room the way it always did on holidays, warm and layered and slightly too loud. Then Dale set his fork down. He picked up his glass and tapped it once with his knife. People quieted. Dale stood up. I have something I want to share with this family, he said. He said it the way someone says it when they've practiced it, when they know what words are coming next and they've ordered them carefully for effect. The table settled. Dale straightened. He looked comfortable in Harold's chair. That made my jaw tight. This family has always meant everything to me, he began. This house has always been the center of it, and I think it's time we talked about what happens to it. Harold would have wanted things handled right. He let that sit for a second. I've had papers drawn up. The house should go to Ryan. Keep it in the family, keep it in the bloodline. He said that last word like it was something holy. Ryan looked up from his plate. He did a good job of looking surprised, but not good enough. He'd known. You could tell. Tammy touched Ryan's arm. Her face had that same sharpened satisfaction I'd seen in other people who'd been waiting a long time to win something. Frank Bellamy set his fork down slowly. He didn't say anything. He just folded his hands on the table and looked at Dale in a way that was hard to read from where I sat. My mother Patricia was already looking at the tablecloth. Her mouth was pressed into a thin line. She was breathing carefully, the way you breathe when you're trying not to be the one who says anything. Dale continued. He was building now, riding the momentum of his own voice. Betty's not going to be here forever. God willing, she's with us a long time yet, but the house needs a plan. And that plan is Ryan. He's the one who carries the family name forward. He glanced down the table. His eyes found me. Some people at this table are family by love, he said. That's a real thing. That's a good thing. But blood is different. A house like this one, a home like this one, that goes to blood. I felt it move through me like cold water. Not the words exactly, the weight behind them. The implication that had been building my whole life, every half-finished sentence finally being finished. I kept my voice even. What do you mean by that, Dale? He looked at me. He didn't flinch. He didn't lower his voice. He turned toward me with 31 people watching, and he said it clearly and without apology. You know what I mean, Kara. You're not blood. You never were. Ask your mother what you actually are to this family. 2 seconds of silence. Long silence. The kind that has texture. Then I heard the sound that broke something open in me, and it came from my left. Mama, Rosie's voice, small and wobbling at the edge of tears. Her hand was on my arm, fingers curled around my sleeve. Mama? What does he mean? Are we not family? 31 people heard my 7-year-old daughter ask that question at a Thanksgiving table in front of the string lights in the window and the mismatched chairs and the good plates we only used on holidays. I had cooked for 5 hours on no sleep for a table where my daughter just heard she might not belong. Something closed in me, a door that had been standing open for 23 years. I had propped it open myself over and over, believing that if I showed up enough times, cooked enough meals, swallowed enough half-sentences, they would let me in. That door closed. Quietly. Finally. I looked at Dale. My voice came out steady. You just said that in front of my daughter. Dale spread his hands. I'm not saying anything that isn't true. Then say all of it. Say exactly what you mean. Right here. In front of everyone. He smiled. Not warm. Patient. The smile of a man who thinks he controls the room. Your mother had you before she was married, Kara. The man involved wasn't family. Wasn't anyone who stayed. You came into this family because Patricia was family, not because you were. And this house is for people who are Callaways by blood. That's just how it is. I want to stop here for 1 second, because sitting at that table, with my daughter's hand on my arm and 31 people watching, I had about 4 seconds to decide what kind of person I was going to be. I had spent my whole life being the one who kept the peace, who swallowed things, who showed up and asked nothing back. But Rosie was watching me, and I understood in that moment that whatever I did next was going to teach her something she'd carry for the rest of her life. So I didn't fold. I reached over, picked Rosie up from her chair, carried her around the table to Linda. Linda didn't ask a single question. She just opened her arms and took her. Rosie pressed her face into Linda's shoulder, and Linda held her like she'd been prepared for this. I walked back to my seat. I didn't sit down. I stood. You've been pointing at this my whole life, I said. So finish it. All of it. Right now. Dale looked around the table. He was checking for backup. I watched his eyes go from face to face. Frank Bellamy, Patricia, the cousins, Bet's neighbor Marcia, who'd known this family 30 years, Reverend Hooper. Not one of them was nodding. Not one of them was with him. He looked back at me. I'm not trying to make this ugly, he said. I'm just telling the truth about how this family works. Then tell it clearly. You've been half saying it for 23 years. Something shifted in his face. A flicker of something I recognized. The bullies tell. The moment when they realize the audience isn't playing along. His voice dropped, but not to a whisper. Dropped to something deliberate. Rehearsed. Fine. You're Patricia's kid, but you were born from a man she was involved with briefly. He was nobody. He left. You don't have Callaway blood. Harold was good enough to let you act like family. But acting like it and being it aren't the same thing. He reached down under his chair and pulled out the envelope from Hendricks and Cole. I had the transfer papers drawn up, he said. Ryan signs, the process starts, and when Bet's time comes, the house passes properly. He slid the papers onto the table. Ryan, he said, come sign. Ryan stood halfway. I watched his face. He was looking at the 31 people watching him. He sat back down. Dale looked at my mother. He pointed at her, finger extended like he was identifying a suspect. Patricia. Tell her. Tell her what you told me years ago. My mother was gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles were pale. She looked at me, and I looked back. And I gave her nothing. No rescue, no anger. Just my face. And the weight of everything she'd had the chance to say for 23 years. Patricia. Dale said again, sharper. My mother's mouth opened, closed. She shook her head slightly. It's complicated, Kara. Is it true? I asked. What he's saying, is it true? Her eyes filled, but she held them carefully. The tears balanced and didn't fall. I'm sorry, Kara. Not a denial, not a clarification. An apology in the shape of a confession. I looked at her for a long time. This woman who had driven me to my EMT certification exam, who had held Rosie the first hour of her life, who had braided my hair every school morning until I was in 6th grade and old enough to feel embarrassed about it. She looked at me and chose, one more time, not to tell the truth. Then I heard a sound. From the far end of the table, wood on hardwood. The slow push of a chair being moved back. I turned. Bet was standing, both hands flat on the table. Her spine was straight. She looked like a woman who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment and was in absolutely no hurry now that it had arrived. She was 79 years old, and she rose from that chair like she was 40. Like every year of watching and waiting had been a spring being wound. Every head turned. 31 people watching a small woman at the end of a Thanksgiving table hold the weight of an entire family. Bet's right hand moved to the green canvas bag on her lap. Her fingers found the safety pin clasp. Nobody spoke. Dale, sitting in Harold's chair at the other end, was watching her. His expression was somewhere between confused and irritated. He had run the script in his head, and this part wasn't in it. Mama, he started. You don't need to. Dale. Betta's voice was quiet. Not loud, not shaky. Quiet the way a school principal is quiet right before a suspension. Sit down. Dale sat, 57 years old, the reflex still there from childhood. Bet reached into the bag and brought out an envelope. Cream-colored. Old. The paper had gone soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times. Written on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. Harold's handwriting, the blocky, careful print of a man who learned to write in an era when it mattered. For Bet. Open when the time is right. The room was completely still. She held it up, not dramatically, not high, just enough so the table could see. Enough so the handwriting was visible. Harold wrote this 4 years ago, she said. The week before he went into the hospital. He sealed it himself and told me I'd know when to use it. She looked at Dale. Tonight, you gave me a table full of witnesses and all the reason I'll ever need. She set the envelope in the center of the table, between the turkey platter and the mashed potatoes, right in the middle of the dinner I'd been up cooking since before dawn. Open it, Dale, she said. Or I will. Nobody breathed. I mean that without any exaggeration. The room had gone so still that I could hear the string lights faintly buzzing in the window, the distant sound of a car going past outside, the tick of the clock on the wall in the kitchen. Rosie had stopped crying in Linda's arms. She was watching her great-grandmother with eyes that were completely wide open. Dale stared at the envelope. His hand hovered over it. Then he picked it up, tore the end open, rough, impatient, like ripping something he was already afraid of, and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. The first was a letter, handwritten on the same careful blocky print as the envelope. 2 pages, front and back. He read it silently. His eyes moved left to right. I watched his face change. First, dismissal. The face of a man who thinks he's about to find nothing. Then, confusion. Then something I had never once seen on Dale in my entire life. Fear. The paper shook slightly in his hand. Betty spoke to the table, not to Dale. I'll tell you what that letter says. Harold wrote it to me, but he knew I might have to read it out loud one day. She paused. She let the room catch up with her. Harold knew something. He knew it for 3 years before he died. He found out by accident. A conversation he overheard. Documents he saw that weren't meant for him. He wrote it all down so there would be no confusion later. She looked at my mother, Patricia. Patricia, when Kara was born, you told this family her father was a man who had left before she was born. A man named Ray Sousa who none of us ever met. You said he wanted nothing to do with the situation and that was the end of it. Patricia didn't move. That was a lie, Bet said. Simply. No drama in it. Just a fact. The table moved like something physical had passed through it. Bet continued. Ray Sousa didn't leave. Ray Sousa wrote letters. He called this house. He wanted to be part of Kara's life. Harold took those calls. He didn't know at the time that Patricia and Dale had decided together that Ray wasn't suitable, that he wasn't family enough, that it was easier to say he'd disappeared than to let Kara have a father who wanted her. I felt the room tilt. Not dramatically. Just a slow, quiet shift, like the floor had moved an inch in a direction you weren't expecting. I looked at my mother. Patricia's hand was over her mouth. Bet reached over and took the letter back from Dale's hands. He didn't resist. He looked like a man who had been hit somewhere he didn't expect and hadn't caught his breath yet. Harold wrote down everything he knew, the name of the man, the dates of the calls, what was said, and what was decided. She held the letter up. Harold felt he should have spoken up at the time, and he didn't. He wrote this as his apology to Kara. She paused. And as a record. Frank Bellamy leaned forward at the table. His voice was low. That sounds like Harold, he said. Bet nodded at him. Then she reached into the envelope that Dale had torn open and slid out the second sheet. This one was typed. Clean margins, official-looking header. After Harold passed, I hired a private researcher. Took me 7 months and cost me $400 I don't regret for 1 second. She folded her hands. Ray Sousa is alive. He lives in Columbus. He remarried. He has 2 adult kids. And according to this, he never stopped trying to find Kara until about 12 years ago, when he was told by a family member, she looked at Dale, that Kara had asked not to be contacted. The sound that came out of Dale's throat wasn't a word, and it was something between a denial and a swallow. He was told Kara didn't want him, Bet said. So he stopped. I stood very still. The room was loud in its silence, if that makes sense. The kind of silence that rings. My whole life I had believed my father simply hadn't wanted me, that he'd walked away before I was even born and never looked back. He had tried. Someone in this room had made sure he failed. Marcia, Bet's neighbor of 30 years, pressed her hand flat on the table and turned to look at Dale directly. Reverend Hooper was very still in her chair with her hands folded, her face the careful neutral of someone who is listening and taking everything in. Frank Bellamy looked at Dale and shook his head. Dale stood up. His chair scraped back hard and nearly fell. He grabbed the edge of the table. I did what was right for this family. His voice was loud now, stage loud, the volume of a man losing the room. Ray Sousa was not family, he was nobody. He was some guy Patricia was involved with for 6 months. You think I was going to let some outsider have access to this family? To this house? You made that decision for me, I said. I was a child. You decided I didn't deserve to know my own father. I protected this family. You protected yourself. My voice stayed steady. I don't know how, but it did. You protected the version of this family where you were the one who made the decisions, where I was always the one who owed you something, where the house was going to be yours to hand to Ryan. Dale looked around the table again. He needed someone. One person to nod. Nobody did. Ryan was staring at his plate. Tammy was looking at the window. Patricia had turned her chair so she was half facing away from the table. Dale turned to Bet. His voice cracked at the edge. Mama, everything I did for this family. Bet looked at him for a long moment. You did it for yourself, Dale, she said. And if Harold had known the full extent of it, he would have said so to your face. She reached back into the green bag and pulled out one more item. A smaller envelope, sealed, with a local law firm's return address printed on the corner. Not Hendricks and Cole. A different firm entirely. "This is a copy," she said. "The original is with my lawyer, Martha Dunn, over on Fairfield Avenue. Has been for 3 years." She set it on the table beside Harold's letter. "This house is in my name. It has been since 1971 when Harold and I bought it. The deed is at the county clerk's office. Go look Monday morning." She folded her hands. "I have a will." Martha Dunn drew it up. "It reflects what Harold and I decided together, and it has nothing to do with what's in that envelope under your chair, Dale, which, by the way, is completely unenforceable because you cannot transfer property you do not own." Dale looked down at the legal documents he'd had drawn up. He picked them up. He stared at them. He set them back down. The papers he'd carried in from Hendricks and Cole, that he'd planned to present as a done deal, were worth exactly nothing. "The house stays in my name," Bet said, "until I decide otherwise. And no lawyer on Main Street, no son of mine, and nobody sitting at this table changes that." Frank Bellamy said softly, "Ruth, Betta, Harold would be proud of you tonight." Bet picked up her glass of water and took a slow sip. Her hand didn't shake. "Harold told me to wait," she said. "He said, wait until Dale shows everyone who he really is. Then nobody can say you're being unfair." She set the glass down. "He gave me a table full of witnesses tonight. I'm grateful. I need to pause here, because I want to ask you something. Why do you think Dale chose a family holiday, a table full of witnesses, to make this announcement? Was it confidence? Was it a calculated power move? Or was it something else? Drop your theory in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think." Bet turned to look at me. Her eyes were soft, but clear. "Kara?" I looked at her. "This house was always going to be yours and Rosie's," she said. "Harold and I decided that years ago. You're the one who showed up. Every holiday, every hospital visit, every time I needed something, you showed up. That is what this house means. That is who deserves it." She folded her hands. "And if you want to know why we decided that, it's simple. Blood doesn't cook the dinner. Blood doesn't show up at 5:30 in the morning on no sleep. Love does. You did." The table was so quiet. I looked at my grandmother. I looked at Rosie, still in Linda's arms, watching me with those wide eyes. And I shook my head. "Grandma," I said, "I don't want the house." The table shifted. Not a gasp, exactly. A quiet recalibration, like everyone adjusted slightly in their chairs at once. Frank Bellamy tilted his head. Marcia's eyebrows rose. Linda looked at me with something surprised and careful in her face. "I'm not going to build something for me and Rosie out of a fight at a dinner table," I said. "I don't want her to grow up knowing her home came from a night like this one." Bet looked at me for a long time. "You sound like Harold," she said. I walked to Linda. I took Rosie from her arms. Rosie put her legs around my waist and her face in my neck, and she smelled like the turkey she'd sneaked a bite of before dinner, and the hand soap from Bet's bathroom that's been the same scent my entire life, lavender and something faintly like vanilla. I looked at Dale one last time. He was still standing. The deed papers were on the table. Harold's letter was on the table. His story was in pieces. "You kept me from knowing my own father," I said. Not loud, not angry, just clear. "I don't know if I'll ever get past that. But I want you to understand something." He looked at me. "I am Harold's granddaughter. I was from the day he chose me, and nothing you said tonight changed that." I walked through the dining room, through the kitchen that smelled like everything I'd been cooking since before the sun came up, out the front door. I pulled it closed behind me gently. The drive to Clover Street is 11 minutes. Rosie was asleep by minute 4, her head tilted against the car seat, one fist resting on her stuffed elephant's ear. I drove without the radio. Just the road and the dark, and the sound of my daughter breathing. When I parked in front of our house, I sat in the car for a while. My phone was on the passenger seat. It had started buzzing. I didn't pick it up yet. I carried Rosie upstairs, took her shoes off without waking her, covered her with the blanket with the small blue stars on it, tucked her elephant beside her. Then I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and checked my phone. Linda. Kara, I am so proud of you. You handled that with more grace than anyone had a right to expect. Frank Bellamy, in a text that surprised me. He must have gotten my number from Bet. Harold talked about you all the time. He knew exactly who you were. I hope you know that too. Marcia, the neighbor. 3 words. You come back. 2 cousins I barely knew. A message from a woman from Bet's church I'd met maybe twice. Nothing from Dale. Nothing from Patricia. I sat on the floor for a while. Then I made myself a cup of tea and went to bed. The next morning, I went to work. 12 hours. 2 calls in the first 6. One of them a bad fall. And an elderly man who'd slipped on his porch steps, scared and embarrassed, and trying to joke about it to keep from crying. I held his hand while we got him onto the stretcher. He said, "You're very calm, you know that?" I said, "I had a big night." He laughed. That helped. Linda called me the Monday after Thanksgiving. She told me what happened after I left. Bet had asked everyone to finish their dinner. Some people did. The turkey was still warm, and 12 years of effort were on that table, so a few of them helped themselves quietly and talked in the careful way people talk after something has cracked in a room. Dale had gone outside. He stood on the back porch near Harold's oak tree for about 30 minutes. Tammy went out to him. They left without coming back inside. Ryan sat at the table for a while longer. He helped clear some of the dishes. Linda said he looked like someone who had woken up from a long sleep and wasn't sure yet what was real. Patricia sat at the table until the last person left, not speaking much, responding when spoken to, staring at Harold's letter which Bet had placed face down on the sideboard. By Tuesday, Millhaven knew. That's how small towns work. 31 witnesses is a bulletin board at every shop on Main Street. By Wednesday, people at the diner were talking about it. By Thursday, it had reached the church. Reverend Hooper paid a visit to Dale at his home on Pembroke Lane. I don't know everything that was said, but Linda told me that Reverend Hooper came away from it looking tired in the way that people look when they've had a conversation that cost them something. Dale had been on the leadership board at First Methodist for 9 years. He served as a lay reader on the 3rd Sunday of every month. He was the kind of visible community member who trades on being trusted. Within 2 weeks, Reverend Hooper had quietly asked him to step back from his board seat. Pending a period of reflection, she called it. In Millhaven, stepping down from a church board seat is not a quiet thing. People notice. People talk. People draw their own conclusions. Dale lost something that mattered to him. Not the house. He never had the house. But the reputation, the standing, the version of himself that the town held. That cost him. I believe it cost him more than he expected. Ryan called me the 2nd week of December. He didn't text first. He just called. When I picked up, there was a long pause before he said anything. "I didn't know about your dad," he said finally. "I didn't know any of that part. About the calls and the letters and what my dad told him." "I know you didn't." Another pause. I'm not saying that makes anything okay. Everything else, the house stuff, the way we all treated you, that's on me too. I needed you to know I didn't know that part." I sat with that for a second. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. It wasn't a resolution. Ryan and I weren't suddenly close. Years of the behavior he'd been raised into don't dissolve in one phone call. But it was an opening, a crack in a door that had been shut a long time. I decided to leave it cracked. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, early December, I was at Rosie's school pickup when I saw Patricia's car parked on the street. She was sitting in it, not looking at her phone, just sitting. I walked over. I tapped on the passenger window. She unlocked it. I got in. We sat side by side without speaking for a while. The school doors hadn't opened yet. Kids would come out in a few minutes. She had a box on the back seat. I could see it without looking directly at it. Shoebox. Old. I brought some things, she said. I didn't know if you'd want them. She handed me the box. Photos. Me as a newborn. Red and squinting and wrapped in a yellow blanket. Me at my first day of kindergarten. The navy dress she'd bought me at Kmart. My hair in 2 braids she'd done herself that morning. Me at my EMT graduation, grinning so wide my face looked too small for the smile. Hun, she'd kept them in a box in her closet. At the bottom, a piece of paper. Not a photo. A printout, old. The edges soft from being folded. It was an email. From Aerreo Sousa, addressed to my mother. Dated 17 years ago, when I was 17. Patricia, I've tried reaching out a number of times and keep being told Kara doesn't want contact. I just want her to know, if she ever changes her mind, I'm here. I have thought about her every single day. I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want her to know she was never not wanted. By me. I'll leave it there. Ray. I read it twice. Then I looked at my mother. Did you show this to Dale? She didn't answer right away. He's the one who responded. She said quietly. I let him. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have. Why did you? She looked at her hands in her lap. Because it was easier. Because Dale said it was better for you. Because I was a coward. Her voice broke on the last word. I was a coward for a very long time about a lot of things, and you paid for it. The school doors opened. Kids started coming out. I could see Rosie's class at the back. Her dark red coat visible from here. I'm not going to pretend we're okay, I said. We're a long way from okay. Patricia nodded. But Rosie loves you. So I'll let her decide what kind of relationship she wants with you. Not me, not Dale, not anybody else. Her. My mother wiped her face with the back of her hand. She nodded again. Rosie came running across the sidewalk. She saw us both in the car, and her face went immediately curious and then bright, because whatever this was, she was going to be optimistic about it. That's Rosie. She knocked on the window. I let her in. Grammy. She climbed over the seat and hugged Patricia before either of us said anything. Patricia held her. Her eyes were closed and her chin was shaking, and she held my daughter like she was holding something she'd been afraid of losing. I looked out the windshield. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not completely ever. But something. That evening, after I put Rosie to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and the email printout, and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. I searched the name. Aerreo Sousa. Columbus, Ohio. There were a few results. A LinkedIn page. A local news mention from a neighborhood fundraiser 4 years ago. A photo. A man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, standing with 2 grown kids at what looked like a graduation. I stared at the photo for a long time. I don't know what I was looking for. Recognition, maybe. Something familiar in the shape of his jaw or the way he was standing. I don't know if I found it or imagined it. I didn't reach out that night. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, but I wrote down the name on a notepad and put it in the kitchen drawer. Not in the trash. The drawer. That felt like enough for now. About 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Bet on a Sunday morning. She asked if I'd bring Rosie over. She was making cornbread and wanted company. We got there at 10. The kitchen was warm. Bet had the radio on low. The old station she always played on Sunday mornings that plays hymns and big band music in some combination that shouldn't work, but does. Rosie put on an apron, the small yellow one Bet kept on the hook for her, and stood on the step stool beside Bet and stirred the batter with the long wooden spoon. Both of them got flour on their faces. Neither of them cared. I leaned in the doorway and watched them. This is what family looks like, I thought. This. Not who has the loudest voice at the table. Not whose name is on a legal document. Not who shows up with a bakery pie and no thank you. This. Flour and laughter and a 7-year-old who is perfectly serious about stirring cornbread in a kitchen that has smelled like this my whole life. After lunch, Bet asked me to sit with her on the back porch, Harold's porch. The one he built in 1978. The one that creaks in the same spot near the left railing every single time. We sat on the old swing together, and the October air had some cold in it, but not enough to go inside. "You know why I waited all those years," she said. It wasn't a question. "You needed him to do it publicly," I said. She nodded. If I'd confronted Dale in private years ago, he'd have called me confused. He'd have found a way to make it about my age, my memory, my judgment. She looked at the oak tree in the corner of the yard. Harold understood that. He said, "Don't fight Dale in a corner. Make him stand in front of people he cares about impressing. Then let him talk." "Were you scared?" She turned to look at me. "Every day for years," she said. "I was scared I'd waited too long. Scared I'd get it wrong somehow. Scared you'd be too hurt to come back from it." I looked at Harold's tree. The bark was rough and dark, and the branches were bare for winter. All that height and reach stripped down to the essential shape of it. "He used to take you out here when you were small," Bet said. "You were maybe 3. He'd put you on his shoulders and you'd try to touch the lowest branch. You couldn't reach. You'd try every time and you couldn't reach, and Harold would laugh and lift you higher." I couldn't speak for a moment. "He always said you were his," Bet said. "He never said it to the room. He didn't have to. But he said it to me plenty. He'd say, 'That's my girl.' Just to me, in the kitchen, watching you do homework at that table. 'That's my girl.'" I looked at my hands. "I know, Grandma." We sat on the swing while the cold air moved around us and the tree stood tall and bare, and the screen door creaked, and somewhere inside, Rosie was singing to herself. "About the house," Bet said. "Grandma." "Let me finish." She put her hand over mine. "I heard what you said at Thanksgiving, about not wanting it to come from a fight at a table. I understand that. That's a good reason." She squeezed my hand once. "But the house was never from that fight. The house was from 40 years of Harold and me watching you. The fight was just the night I finally said it out loud." I didn't answer. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said. "I just wanted you to know the reasoning. It's not charity. It's not argument. It's observation." She let go of my hand. We watched. We saw who showed up. The swing creaked. The tree stood still. Rosie's singing drifted through the door. "I want to pause here and ask you something. There's something I've been thinking about since that night. My mother had that email from Ray Sousa for 17 years. She kept it in a box in her closet. Do you think she kept it because she felt guilty? Or do you think she was keeping it for a day when she thought she might actually give it to me? What do you think she was waiting for?" Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely don't know the answer, and I've turned it over 100 times. It's been 4 months since Thanksgiving. Let me tell you where things are. Dale and I have not spoken. I'm not sure we will. Not for a long time. There are things he took from me. A relationship with my father. 23 years of believing I was unwanted by someone who had actually tried. That I don't know how to put a timeline on forgiving. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe forgiving doesn't look like having dinner together on holidays. Maybe it looks like releasing it enough to not carry it every day. I'm working on the releasing part. I stopped paying Dale the monthly contribution he'd been taking. $200 a month he told Bet was for household expenses when it was actually just going into his pocket. I found that out in January when Bet mentioned she'd never seen a dime of it. That's $2,400 a year I keep now. It's gone into an account I opened for Rosie. Her name's on it. I put a little in every month. Patricia and I have seen each other 6 times. Short visits, careful ones. Once I brought Rosie for dinner at her house and they baked cookies together. And I sat at the kitchen table and watched them and felt some complicated thing that I don't quite have a word for yet. Not forgiveness, not anger. Something like a long-held breath letting out slowly. My mother is seeing a counselor in a town 40 minutes away. She told me that at the third visit when she picked Rosie up from school. She said it the way you say something when you're trying to prove something, which is different from saying it because you want to. But she's going. That's something. Ryan and I have spoken 3 times. He came into Patsy's diner in January when I was getting coffee before a shift and sat down across from me without asking and said he'd been thinking about a lot of things. He said he was looking at getting his own apartment. I told him that was a good idea. He said Megan had told him the same thing for 2 years and he'd finally listened. I said, "Megan sounds smart." He laughed. First time I'd heard him laugh without his father in the room setting the tone for it. It was a good sound. I've been looking into contacting Ray Sousa. I haven't done it yet. I've written a first sentence in a notes app on my phone 6 different times and deleted it 6 different times. I don't know what I'm afraid of exactly. Rejection, maybe, or the opposite of rejection, which might be harder. But I have the name. I have the email from 17 years ago. I have evidence that he tried. Linda said to me, "You don't have to decide what he is to you before you reach out. Just reach out. The deciding can come after." That felt like good advice from someone who had always known the right thing to do and had the patience to wait for me to catch up. 2 weeks ago, on a Saturday in early March, I took Rosie to bed. And we raked the front yard, some leftover leaves from fall that had blown back in over winter. And Rosie took the task extremely seriously, dragging a rake that was taller than her across the grass and declaring every pile she made the biggest one. Betty stood on the porch watching us, coffee in hand. Harold's oak tree had the first tiny buds of spring on it. Just barely, just the suggestion of them, but there. Rosie saw them before I did. "Mama, look." She dropped the rake and ran to the tree. She reached up toward the lowest branch, same as always, same as I apparently did at 3 years old, and she was just barely, barely too short. I walked over. I lifted her. She touched the branch with both hands and made a sound of pure satisfaction. I thought about Harold lifting me toward that same branch 40 years ago. That's my girl. And I held Rosie up there for a while, both of us looking at the tiny spring buds, the sky pale blue and cold behind them. Then she said, "Okay, Mama, I got it." And I put her down and she went back to her rake. I stood there by the tree for a moment. I didn't need a house. I didn't need an inheritance. I didn't need the deed or the papers or the validation that comes from a family deciding to officially include you. Harold had already given me everything I needed. He lifted me toward the branch. I don't know what Easter will look like this year. I don't know if I'll cook for anyone or just make something simple for me and Rosie at our kitchen table on Clover Street. I don't know if my mother and I will ever fully close the distance that's been between us since November, or if Dale will ever sit in a room and actually reckon with what he took from me. But I know this. Rosie will never sit at a table where someone measures her worth in bloodlines. She will never hear an adult tell her she doesn't belong because of who her father was, or wasn't, or where she came from. That is my line. I will not cross it. I stopped cooking for people who never said thank you. I stopped writing checks to people who called it family obligation when it was something else entirely. I stopped folding. Not because I got angry enough. Because I watched my daughter watch me at that table and I understood that who I chose to be in that moment was going to be the thing she carries. I chose to stand up. I still eat cereal on the kitchen floor sometimes. Still get tired in ways that sleep doesn't really fix. Still work 48-hour rotations and pick up Rosie from school and make dinner and help with homework and start the whole thing over again. But I do it in a house where my daughter has her own room. The paint color is pale yellow. She called it buttery. Same word she used for Bet's spare room. She picked it herself. We moved in February. The deposit came from the money I stopped giving to Dale. The first night we slept there, Rosie was too excited to sleep. She kept coming out of her room on some pretext. She needed water. She had a question. She wanted to show me something. The fourth time she came out, she didn't have a reason. She just stood in the hallway in her pajamas, looking at her bedroom door. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "I just wanted to look at it." Her room, her door, her house. I understood that completely. We stood in the hallway together for a minute, just looking at the pale yellow door. "Okay," I said finally. "Back to bed." She went. I stood there a little longer. That's mine, I thought. That's ours. Not from a fight at a dinner table. Not from anyone's charity. Not from a deed transfer or a lawyer's envelope or a grandfather's guilt. From showing up. From earning it. From a grandmother who watched for 40 years and a grandfather who lifted me toward a branch I couldn't quite reach and called me his. That's the whole story. Or at least everything up to right now. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I'll hear Harold's voice in a stranger's face someday if I ever meet Ray Sousa. I don't know if my mother and I will cook a meal together again in that kitchen on Thanksgiving morning, or if that chapter is fully closed. But I know what family looks like now. Not a name on a deed. Not a bloodline in a legal document. It looks like a small woman standing up at the end of a table and saying, "Enough." It looks like an old letter in a cream-colored envelope kept safe for years. It looks like flour on two noses and a long wooden spoon and a yellow apron on a hook. It looks like someone lifting you just high enough to touch what you couldn't reach on your own. If this story landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment. Not about me. About you. What's your table moment? What's the moment you stopped folding? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, there's another one in the description. I think you should hear it. Thank you for staying with me this far. I'll see you next time.